Hi, my name is Dr. David Campt. I'm with the Dialogue Company, and I want to welcome you to the fourth in our series of conversations for the Voice Project. Voice stands for Voters Organized to Influence Critical Elections. And so we're going to today shift our focus from what it has been the past 3 weeks, where we're trying to get people to vote. We're now trying to talk about persuading people. So I want to thank you for coming and to introduce or have my co-host introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karin Tamerius. I'm the founder of Smart Politics, and I'm an expert in political psychology and psychiatry, and I specialize in helping people talk about politics without arguing.
All right. Thank you, Karin. So today's focus, as we talk about the REACH method, or the core methodologist project, which we will explain, we're going to focus on staying calm for conversations across differences. If you're going to try to persuade somebody, it's going to be important to calm down. And so we're going to drill down a little bit on that, but we're also going to show you the whole REACH method. But we're going to explain that in some detail before we do a role play. So let's just go through the agenda. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about emotion and politics. We're going to do some little discussion about emotion management basics. And then we're going to talk about reflecting before conversations and do the role play. And then we'll do any questions. So that's going to be our focus. So let us get started. And because we are blessed to have a world-class psychiatrist, she's going to handle talking about emotions and politics.
Thank you, David. One of the things that we all know is that having conversations about politics is emotionally fraught. So what I'd like to start with today is just a little bit of information about why that is. So emotion really is the biggest barrier to having conversations across difference. And that's because so many of us, when confronted with somebody who has different political beliefs, get triggered. So what is triggered? What does it mean when we become triggered? When we get triggered, it means that our brains go into something called fight or flight. Now, this is your brain. The part of the brain that's highlighted here is called the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of your emotion or your brain that's responsible for emotions. And this little part here in red is called the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain most important for processing threat. So when you are feeling under attack, when you are feeling in danger, that's the part of the brain that takes that message in. Now, this other part of the brain here up front is called the prefrontal cortex. And now that is the part of the brain that makes us human. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for all of your executive functions, things like planning and decision making. And also it's really important for things like empathy and compassion. So we want to make sure in any conversation that the frontal lobes are fully engaged. But here's the problem. When we have a conversation across difference and we start to feel threatened, there's a change in the activation of the brain. So here you can see the amygdala getting lit up, right? It's very activated. Well, when that happens, those frontal lobes, which are responsible for being reasonable, being rational, making good decisions, planning out actions, it actually goes offline. Blood flow to the frontal lobes stops, gets cut way down, so that your amygdala and your limbic system can control your behavior. So let's think for a moment about what happens in the body when your amygdala gets activated and your frontal lobes go offline. First of all, you get a huge release of stress hormones, and that causes an increase in heart rate. It causes elevated blood pressure. It increases your respiratory rate, so your breathing gets faster and deeper. You have more blood that gets shunted from other parts of your body to your arms and legs, and you get increased blood sugar. All of those things are designed to put you into a mode that is prepared for either fighting back or running away. Now, what do you notice in a conversation when you get triggered? Well, you might notice things like sweating, flushing, shaking. You might have a dry mouth. You might develop tunnel vision. You might not even be able to hear very well. And most important, you might notice that you're not thinking particularly well. This is why often when we come out of a political conversation where we've been triggered, we realize we've said some things that we regret. So why does this fight or flight response happen? The big reason is because for a long time, the fight or flight response served us well. From an evolutionary perspective, it's what saved us. In a conflict with a wild animal, you don't need to think. All you need is to run or to fight back to defend yourself. But here's the problem. Ideas aren't wild animals. Ideas aren't going to kill us, at least not in the moment. So why do we still respond to them as if we were being attacked by a lion rather than just having a conversation with someone who disagrees with us? And the reason for that is that we only have one nervous system. It's not like we have one nervous system that is going to defend us against lions and tigers and another nervous system to help us have a political conversation. It's the same wiring either way. And our brain can't tell the difference. So if we're confronted with a threatening lion or confronted with a threatening idea, we can end up feeling the exact same way. So David, do you want me to do emotion management basics, or are you going to take that over?
I want to do emotion management basics. I want you to do the first one. The emotions can't hurt us because you're a doctor and you know about hurt and about emotions. So tell me, and I'll take the ones after that.
Sounds good. Why don't you take it from here?
All right. So the first thing that is important to note, and as a dialogue person, I say this, is that we got to get hold of our own emotions. And so here's what's important thing to remember. And I'm looking forward to if Karin wants to add into this. Emotions can't hurt you. Part of what I think happens for people is in a context of talking to somebody, they notice themselves feeling angry, notice themselves feeling sad, or any number of unpleasant emotions. And it's like, I cannot feel that. They can't tolerate feeling that, as if those emotions themselves are going to hurt you. And I have found that it is useful to remember that you're not going to be hurt by emotions. It's useful to develop what the Zen masters call a certain level of detachment from emotion. Oh, I'm noticing I'm feeling kind of angry now. Like, it's important to have that, develop the capacity to put your emotions in that context so that you're not running from emotions and therefore acting toward the other person in regard to that feeling of distance from the emotion. You want to add anything to that, Karin, before I move on? Karin, you still there? We might have lost her. Okay.
One of the best things we can do is, oops. David?
I'm having trouble hearing Karin. Hello?
Sorry, David. I'm here. I can hear you, but I guess you can't hear me.
Yeah, who knows? Okay. So say that one more time so I can hear it, and then we can move on to the next slide.
Okay. I was just saying that I agree with you that a lot of times what we need to do is just wait for emotions to pass. They will pass.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So the next point that it's important to bring up is that the other person has feelings too, because part of what also can happen is because we're flooded with some emotion, we might not like it, we don't want to feel it. It's easy to forget that the other person has feelings too. And so if we're really trying to, especially be persuasive, much less just connect with somebody, and much less be persuasive, it's important to remember on some level, it's not all about us, right? We have to remember the other person has feelings too. And sometimes feelings are contagious. So if we're agitated or angry, they might get agitated or angry. So, and even if they feel something different, it's important for us to remember that we're trying to approach this conversation with a reason. So we need to remember they have feelings too. Along with that, emotions are contagious, right? So you don't want to get too agitated, because your being agitated encourages the other person to be agitated. You're modeling how they should participate in the conversation in a way that's not helpful to your goals of persuading them. Next slide. What we want to try to do is to keep the emotional level, ours and the other person's, in the growth zone. So we don't want to be so challenging where we make people defensive and they want to flee or fight us. But we are trying to persuade somebody. We're trying to move somebody. So we're trying to keep them in the growth zone, not just stable, but not in the red zone of fight or flight. We want to be in a level of alertness and a level of emotional energy that's not too calm, but not too agitated either. Did you want to add anything to that, Karin?
No. It's. I guess the one thing worth adding is, people can't learn when they're triggered, and they aren't curious enough to learn if they aren't challenged at least a little bit. So it is very much a balancing act to keep them in that yellow zone, and also to keep yourself in that yellow zone. You don't want to be triggered or in a totally stable place either. You want to be curious, you want to be learning, you want to be paying attention.
Okay, and this last one I make about emotional management, I think is the most important. And that has to do with your attitude toward it, which is to focus on the process of connecting with somebody, not the outcome. And here's how I would say on that. If you are too focused on, I have to change this person's mind, which they sense that, and they generate something called reactance. Well, they don't want to change just because you want them to change. And my best analogy, it's like trying to catch a butterfly in your hand. The quickness of trying to reach for it pushes the wind you generate, pushes the thing away you're trying to catch. And so what I think is important to do is to try to develop there's a detachment again, a certain detached attitude towards it, where you want them to change, but you're not so fixated on it. But you're more fixated on trying to execute a process that has a good chance of the change happening, but you don't want to be too focused on, I have to change this person, because that emotion itself will undermine your objective. Okay. So to move on now to how do you prepare yourself for this process? So first I want to talk about the REACH method. I'm going to review that briefly. If you can put that slide up. So we've gone over it before in the other times, but because this is the core methodology we teach in this course, I just want to review it briefly. And we're going to drill down a little bit today on the Reflex Step. So REACH method stands for reflect, inquire, agree, confess, and harmonize. Reflect, that means what we're going to focus on today is calm down, regulate your own emotions so you can participate in all the other steps. This makes the other steps more possible. Inquire, British spelling, means ask questions. Find out where they're coming from. Have them talk to you first. Have them tell you an underlying story or some set of values, but you're having to go beneath their beliefs to something a little deeper, something that is upholding their beliefs. Agree, you let them know that you agree with them, you accept them, you find something of value in their perspective. Confess, you want to tell a story that embodies the fact that you don't think they're crazy, basically. And then harmonize, that's where you tell another story that conveys your perspective, and you try to invite them to integrate their story that you asked about in the inquire step, what you said in the confess step, and then another story that you've told, which is a story, another story you've told in the harmonize step, where you try to work together to say, how can we put all these things together? And you're trying to do that in context of trying to persuade them in this particular case. Okay. And again, these steps work outside the dimension of voting, but we're talking today about voting since the election is coming. Okay. let's talk about let's drill down on the reflex step. There's a couple of aspects. I'm going to take the first two, and then Karen's going to talk about the second two. So the first aspect of reflect is just relaxing. It's so important to center yourself emotionally. So one of the things that we promote are you finding some method of relaxation that actually is helpful for you. So whether it's taking deep breaths, or whether it's like going mentally to a happy place, or some people do progressive body relaxation, and some people can learn how to do this and do it in a relatively quickly after they learn to practice it. But the point is to actively do something to center yourself so you can relax. Next slide. Then rekindle. It's so important. If you're trying to persuade somebody has different views than you do. Part of what we don't want to do is to have the emotions of them being them being the enemy. That's so easy to do. So what we want to do is to rekindle our compassion for them. We might think about, if we've known them for a long time, we might think about some positive memory, just to focus on that for a second. Or you might think about something you like about them. Or if you don't know them, it's just some quality about theirs that you're curious about. But the point is to open up your heart to them. That's going to help you be in a space of listening and be in a space of openness that's going to be helpful for your persuasive work. Karin, why don't you take the next two?
Sure. So when you're talking with someone who has different views, it's really important to stay in touch with why that is. And during the reflect step, I really suggest that you take some time to remind yourself that they grew up perhaps in a different environment. Maybe they get their news from a different news source. Maybe they belong to a different community where everyone they know thinks like they do. And understanding where people's political views are coming from is going to help you be more understanding during the conversation. The last step before actually starting the conversation is really to ready yourself. And this is a more strategic step than just thinking things through and preparing yourself emotionally. The ready step is really about picking a good time and place. It's thinking through what you're going to ask in that inquire step rather than just winging it. Because if you ask the wrong question to start out with, that can kind of make the other person defensive. So it's important to give that some thought. It's also a good idea to think through some of the stories that you might be using. From these previous sessions that we've done, we've shown you a lot of different types of stories that you can use depending on whether you're using it for the confess step or the harmonize step. But you usually need to have access to a fairly wide range of personal stories to be prepared for a variety of situations. So taking a moment to think through some of your stories is a good idea. And then finally, for having conversations across difference, a really valuable step is to have an emergency exit strategy. Of course, you always hope that things are going to go well, that you aren't going to get triggered and the other person isn't going to get triggered. But the fact is, it could happen. We're all human beings. No matter how well you execute the REACH method, triggering can happen. And you don't want to stay in a conversation after you or the other person has been triggered. So coming up with a plan ahead of time for how to gracefully exit is a really good idea.
All right. Okay. So we're going to do a role play. And in this role play, Karin is going to be the person who's trying to be persuasive, and I'm going to be an undecided voter. So what's going to happen is, because today we're drilling down on the reflect step, we're going to do the whole role play. But at first, in the reflect step, Karin's going to give you some more of her inner dialogue, because much of the reflect step is inner work by the person who's trying to be persuasive. So, Karin, I'm going to let you take it away, and I'm going to be that undecided voter.
Okay. So I know I'm going to have a conversation with my friend David today. I know already that he is an undecided voter because I asked him my 2 questions. And what he told me when I asked him the 2 questions was that he's 100% going to vote. He's a definite voter. But he said he was really smack dab in the middle in terms of thinking through who he plans to vote for. He's right at 50-50. So I know that because I'm a Biden supporter, I'm going to try to persuade him today. And so how am I going to go into that conversation? Well, first, I want to relax. And for me, my personal relaxation method is deep breathing. So I take a number of deep breaths, let it out on a count of probably 4, 2, 3, 4, and I repeat that a couple of times until I'm feeling really calm and really centered. The next thing I do is I rekindle. So I think about, okay, how do I feel about David? And I think through some of the things that I know about him. And
this should be really easy in this case.
I'm sorry?
This should be really easy to remember all the great things about me.
Yeah, right. I know that David is a very kind person. He's very warm. He's compassionate. I know he cares very deeply about other people. I would probably think about how amazing he is as a caretaker for his parents. So all of those things are reminding me of David's humanity. This isn't just about, getting him to vote the way I want him to vote. I'm about to enter into a conversation with someone I really care about. So the third thing is to remind myself about where David is coming from with his political views. And the first thing I remember is, well, David grew up in a very different place than I did. I grew up in San Diego, California. David grew up in Detroit, Michigan. The Southern California and the Midwest are very different places. And so we come from different backgrounds. I don't actually know where he gets his news, what his news sources are. But we are coming from different backgrounds, and that might explain why David hasn't made up his mind yet. Maybe he doesn't have the same kinds of news sources that I do. I also know that I'm a white person and David's a black person, and that race is a huge divider in American politics, and that has to have an impact on the way both of us see the world, and something that I need to keep in mind. Finally, I have to get ready. So I've decided that I'm going to talk with David I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give David a telephone call. We haven't chatted in a while, and maybe I'll send him a text ahead of time, so it's kind of an appointment. I know that I won't catch him at a bad time. In terms of what I'm going to ask, I think the best way to have this conversation is just to remind him that I asked him a while back about whether he was going to vote and who he was voting for. And so I'm going to reference that, and I'm going to ask him if he's thought any more about it. And then I think I'll just ask him how he feels about the direction of the country right now, if he thinks things are going well, and what he's most worried about. Now, in terms of stories I might tell, I have a couple of things in mind based on the fact that I think it's likely that there are probably 2 things David is most worried about right now, is my guess. He's either most worried about the economy, or he's probably most worried about COVID, because those are kind of the things that are most at the forefront of everybody's mind in America right now. And I have some regular stories to tell about those things, so I've got those handy. Now, my emergency exit strategy. If David gets triggered, if I get triggered, I don't think that's going to happen this time because he's an undecided voter and we're such good friends. But just in case, my plan is to just say, hey, David, I it seems like we're having a little trouble having this conversation right now, and I do want to talk about this with you, but maybe this isn't the best time. So why don't we table this conversation for now and come back to it later? Is that okay with you? And I think it'll be fine, and we can move on from there. So I'm feeling pretty good. I'm centered. I'm ready. I'm feeling connected and compassionate about David. I kind of know where he's coming from. So I think I'm gonna start the conversation now.
All right.
So, hey, David.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. What about you?
Oh, just a lot of anxiety about this whole election thing. I'll be glad when it's over. So much hubbub about it, but yeah, I'll be glad when it's so much conflict. I'm glad it's when it'll be over.
Yeah, I think we'll all be a lot happier when it's over. Actually, I did want to talk to you about the election, because you remember a while back I had contacted.
Oh yeah, that was really interesting. You asked me those two questions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And at the time you said that you definitely are going to vote, but you still hadn't made up your mind. Where are you on that scale right now?
I still made it up. I'm still trying to figure out who to vote for. Yeah, I'm still working that out.
Yeah. Well, how are you kind of feeling about the direction of the country right now?
Well, I'm very worried that we're sliding into a big depression. On one hand, a lot of people are getting sick. I've known somebody who died in March. There's a lot of people getting sick, but on the other hand, I've known a lot of people who are thrown out of their jobs, and especially in the Black community. So because we're getting hit harder than that, we're getting hit harder than other people. Excuse me. So part of what I'm torn about is between candidates who tend to focus on being more safe, and they can't focus on opening up the economy, because on the one hand, I know people have died. On the other hand, I know people who are out of work and who are looking at a really bleak future because they are no longer working. So that's what's on my mind.
So what I hear you saying is you've got some ambivalence there. Like, on the one hand, you want to be safe from COVID, but on the other hand, you're really worried if we continue taking all of these measures that it's going to the economy even more, and worried about work.
So, and that makes it hard to choose which candidates, because they seem to be focusing on different things.
Yeah, I get that completely. I have been that it's hard. I think this time is hard for everybody. I'm worried about the economy. I'm worried about whether my husband's going to be able to keep his job. Mm-hmm. But I'm also worried about, I have parents, and they're older, and I'm really worried about their health. So absolutely. And I think
I'm glad you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And it when I think about the trying to decide who to vote for too, it's hard, because the candidates are different, right? You've got Donald Trump, who seems to be weighing the economy over COVID, and you've got Biden, who seems to be
weighing COVID over the economy. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's hard. So for me, when I think about this situation, there's a part of me that really, I think, pushes me more toward Trump, which is weird for me, because I'm a Democrat and I'm a Biden voter, but at the same time, I'm looking at a situation where people I know are losing their jobs right now, and I can't help wondering if they wouldn't be able, if we opened up the economy more, if they could continue working, right? So
Sounds like you're torn like me.
I know, like I was talking on the phone just the other day with a woman who she's worked at the same company for 20 years, right? And now she has lost her job because of the economic crisis and the fact that everything's been shut down. And at the same time, she was diagnosed with cancer. So now she's lost her job. She's lost her health care because of losing her job, and she's been diagnosed with cancer. And that's a really difficult place to be. So I can totally understand wanting to like get the economy up and running, because I imagine if she's out there in that situation, then there are a lot of people out there in that situation, right?
Right.
But then on the other hand, I've got this other situation, which is when I was like back in, I guess it was July now, I got really sick, and I was never able to confirm that it was COVID, but I think it was. And my breathing got really bad, and it was like, there was one day I was fine, and I woke up the next day and I couldn't breathe. Like the first day I was like working out, exercising. I felt great actually. And the next day I woke up and I couldn't breathe well enough to exercise. I couldn't breathe well enough to take a walk. And at first I thought it was asthma, but it turned out it wasn't asthma. And here's the thing, David, was it took about 3 weeks for me to even get out of bed again after that. And it's only this week that I am exercising at the level I was before I got sick.
Got you.
So I'm a young, healthy person. Well, sort of young, but mostly I'm a young, healthy person. But if it did that to me, if COVID did that to me, I can't even begin to imagine, what it would do to my parents or my husband's parents or other people. And I'm so glad in retrospect that I didn't visit my parents, for example, at all during the month of June, the month of July. Like I have been really strict about that and not being out. And I'm glad. I'm glad I've made those decisions. And I think ultimately that's kind of why I come down in supporting Biden, because I think those costs, the danger of the disease kind of outweighs the economic.
I got you. Huh. I'll think about that. Okay. Got you. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. But David, I'm not.
So Karin, we are past time.
Oh, we're past time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So,
so we
need to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So I think the big picture on this for people watching is that the core of the reach method is that you want to find something you can agree with before you try to challenge. That's the agree before challenging, ABC. That's a critical factor. And you saw Karin did that, that she found a way for me to empathize with my point of view before she tried to invite me to a different point of view. And that's the critical factor in the reach method. But we've had a good role play, but we have gone on a little bit. We've gone past our time.
I've always been a little wordy.
Right. So it's okay. So so were there any questions? Goddess Elena is monitoring the chat. Is there any questions is there one question we want to handle perhaps quickly, Elena?
Yes, we do have a question. I popped it up earlier. It's from our friend Sharon. I appreciate the reminder to not continue the conversation if either person, me or the other, is triggered. So she's interested to hear more ideas for the exit strategy.
So Karin, you have any, you want to take that? I mean, you've thought about that a lot more than I have.
Oh, well, it really depends on two things. Like the environment that you're in. So if you are at a party, it might be a good time to say, you know what, I need to use the restroom.
I need some social distance from you now.
Yeah, right. But and you know what? One of the things about it is you can be really honest with the other person and say, oh, you know what? I'm getting kind of triggered. I don't want to have this conversation while I'm triggered. So can we, put a pin in it and come back to it later? Most people are very actually understanding about that and appreciative that you're making that okay. And I think the really important thing is to make it clear that this doesn't mean you don't want to have the conversation, that you still want to come back and do it. You just want to do it when you're calm enough to think clearly and really connect.
You're giving them the old Seinfeldian, it's not you, it's me. Basically.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And you put it and for some people, for some cases, you want to I don't want this to harm our relationship, so I'm going to bow out of this right now. Then you didn't remind them that you have affection for them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we need to close a little past time, so I want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you so much, Elena, for managing us. And I would say look forward to next week. Well, first of all, we're going to have a watch party tonight on this. So tell your homies and homettes if they didn't see it to come back at 8:00. It'll be on the Dialogue Company's Facebook page. And then and we'll try to make ourselves available for questions. Even though I'm in a beautiful remote location, I will tune in at 8:00 so we can field any questions. And then we'll still be doing these for another 3 weeks after today. And next week, we're going to do the reach method. We're going to focus on the inquire step. Learning how to ask questions to get people talking is such an important thing, and not something we're used to doing. Get people talking beneath their beliefs. That's what's really important. So it's not just having to spot their beliefs is not as helpful as go beneath their beliefs to values or, better yet, experiences. So that's what we're going to focus on next week. So I want to thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you, Karin. And to all those out there in Voterland, go get them people to vote.
Thank you. This now concludes our broadcast.